On April 27th, 2020, at exactly 9:41 a.m., I started my position in Visa with $153. Now, before I even bought into this company, a few things happened. I painstakingly went through the financials of both Visa and Mastercard because they are the two biggest payment processors out there, and I wanted in. So from that day forward, I started a trek. That trek included looking at Visa's financials and Mastercard's financials to see which is a better investment. And 6 hours ago, I was re-inspired to try that same experiment once again, and I asked my community, Visa or Mastercard? With 78% in favor of Visa, it's time to jump back into this discussion once and for all. So in this video, we're going to be diving into the financials of both companies, and we're going to be comparing them with full transparency and from an unbiased opinion. And when I say unbiased, I mean I will leave my bias out of it, even though I have $10,000 invested in Visa right now. Because my investing thesis does not involve my ego. If I was wrong or things change over time, which they typically do, then I want to know that as an informed investor. And if Mastercard is looking like the better investment right now, I would like to know so, and I'm sure you would too. If you have ever thought about investing in one of these companies, then this video is for you. Sit back, relax, I hope you enjoy, and let's dive into the video. But first, like all of my videos, let's do a portfolio update real quick. The portfolio is currently sitting at $92,000. As far as year performance goes, I'm currently up 44% or $28,000. And as far as all-time view, I'm up 52% or $31,000. Now with that out of the way, to compare these two companies, I'm going to be using a few different resources. Those resources are: one, Barron's. It's a subscription I have which gives me a lot of data on different companies I invest my money into. Not only that, but we're going to be looking at some of the highlights from their annual reports. We'll take a look at a few videos discussing both companies so we can get a better understanding of them. And of course, we're going to be looking at both companies' financials on Qualtrim.com. So first and foremost, let's watch this video to see exactly how Visa earns their money, because it can be quite confusing if you're not familiar with it.
Visa enables the success of its partners all over the world by securely routing payment information, data, and transaction authorizations in seconds. Visa offers access to millions of cardholders and merchants worldwide, with the ability to process over 65,000 transactions every second. Visa's clearing processes ensure the right funds are delivered to the right institutions at the right time. The typical Visa transaction involves a cardholder who pays and a merchant who receives compensation. Let's see how this works. Kaylee has invited a few friends over for an evening meal to celebrate a recent promotion. On her way home from work, she swings by the local market to pick up some groceries. After stocking up, Kaylee uses her Visa card at the point of sale, or POS device, to pay for her groceries. The POS sends the transaction to the acquirer, also known as the merchant bank. This message requests authorization to take the payment funds from Kaylee's account at her issuing bank and transfer them to the merchant's acquiring bank. The acquirer sends the authorization message to VisaNet for processing. VisaNet rapidly routes the message to the bank that issued Kaylee her card. Within a fraction of a second, the issuer reviews the authorization request, checks Kaylee's available funds, and approves or declines the transaction. Looks like Kaylee has plenty of funds to cover the transaction. The data flow now reverses through the process. The issuer sends the authorization response back to VisaNet, which routes it to the acquirer. The acquirer transmits its approval to the merchant. Within seconds, Kaylee is good to go. She thanks the merchant and heads home to prepare for her friend's arrival. Whether face-to-face, through e-commerce, or with mobile commerce, consumer transactions flow through three distinct VisaNet processes. We just covered authorization. Now let's look at the other two, clearing and settlement. Clearing is the process in which sales information from the acquirer is first transmitted to VisaNet, where settlement obligations, including fees and charges, are determined and then routed to the issuer. Clearing is initiated by the merchant once paid. The merchant transmits sales draft transaction information, including account numbers and transaction amounts, to their acquirer. The acquirer, or a third-party processor, formats the information into a clearing message and transmits it to VisaNet. Visa routes the clearing message to the issuer. At this point, the settlement process begins. During settlement, The issuer pays the acquirer through Visa for their cardholders' completed purchase and cash transactions. The issuer credits Visa, and then Visa credits the acquirer. The acquirer then credits the merchant's account for the transaction amount, less fees.
All right, so that was a lot to take in, but it gives you an overview of how the company actually works. Again, if you're going to invest your money into any company, you really have to understand what you're buying into and the basic operations of the company itself. So I know some portions of that were tough to sit through, but nevertheless, it is important. One other thing I like to take a look at when I'm investing in any company is taking a look at super investors' portfolios to see what they hold. When we're talking about Visa and Mastercard, they are absolutely in the discussion. These two lists are based on multiple super investors' portfolios that manage well over $100 million. And the thing you'll notice in both of them is Visa and Mastercard. The top 10 most owned stocks by super investors you have coming in at number 6 is Visa, and coming in at number 10th is Mastercard. As for the top 10 stocks by percentage, Visa is 8th on that list and Mastercard is 10th again. This doesn't play into the investment strategy so much, but it's a good indication when you see well-informed investors that have historically outperformed the market buying the same companies you're interested in. Next thing I want to do is jump over to Barron's, and I want to compare both stocks and look at some of the data. To kick us off, we're going to be starting with Visa stock, which is currently trading at $259 per share. If we take a look down here at the analyst rating, it looks like the price target out of 39 ratings is $283 per share. So Visa is still well under that, so there's some room for growth. Just below that, we have the stock grader. It gives us a little summary of the company's financials, which we will get into as well. It says the company's fundamentals look healthy and well balanced between growth and value. So that is a good sign for investors. Well, let's break that down a little further. Diving into the stock grader a little bit more, it actually rates the fundamentals and the sentiment of the company. So as far as fundamental rating goes, they have it at a 69 out of 100, which is a buy, and the sentiment rating is a 9.2. which isn't bad either. Taking a look over here, they have a few interesting lists that I'm sure many people have not seen. The first list they have in rankings is Price to Perfection. They have it at an 83 out of 176. As far as Cash Kings, they have it as a 29 out of 75, so that's pretty good. And Best Growth Stocks, they have it at 101 out of 179. So a little bit higher than I would like, but nevertheless, that's pretty good. One of the most important sections on here is the fundamental analysis, and they actually broke it down for us with a grading system. The grading system they use is similar to most schools out there, typically an A to a D rating, A being the best. So if we look at growth first, they have it rated as a B. Slide this over a little bit, we'll take a look at the value section. They currently have it as a C, which is lower than I expected. As for profitability, they have it as an A+, so really good. And when we're talking about cash flows, they have it as an A as well. So it looks like the only area that's of concern is the value section. Now, the same thing we just did with Visa, let's take a look at Mastercard to compare the two. So Mastercard is currently trading at $419 per share. So from a cost perspective, much higher than Visa. But that doesn't necessarily indicate the company is more valuable or overpriced. So let's dive deeper. As far as the analyst rating goes, they have the price target at $456 per share. So again, room to grow for this company in their eyes. And looking at the stock grader again and that little blurb, it says the stock looks expensive despite the company's mostly healthy fundamentals. The key word to that is mostly. I want to see what they mean by that, so let's dive deeper. As far as the fundamental rating goes, they have it as a 60.5 and the sentiment rating a 7.7. We'll take a look at those lists again and the rankings they have for it. First, Price to Perfection, 48 out of 176. Cash King, 75 out of 75, so dead last. And Best Growth Stocks, they have it at 45 out of 179, so that's a bit better. Jumping into the fundamental analysis once again, we'll take it each section at a time. First, we have the growth section. They have it as a B right now, so not bad, starting off good. It looks like the value section, Mastercard is struggling as well. They currently have it as a D, which is lower than Visa. Profitability is looking good as well. They have it as an A+, and cash flows is an A-. So all in all, not that bad. It looks like the value section is struggling for both companies. Putting that aside, let's jump into the annual report and some of the highlights for Visa. First thing that sticks out to me right away, and that is the net revenue, $32.7 billion, up 11% from the prior year. The GAAP net income, they have it at $17.3 billion, up 15% from the prior year. Non-GAAP net income up 14% at $18.3 billion. So it looks like the fundamentals of this company are improving, up double digits from the previous year. One section that really stuck out to me was this right here. Their services are currently offered using 160 different currencies, so that's pretty crazy to think about. The payment volume, 12.3 trillion, up 6% from the prior year. Processed transactions, 212 billion, up 10% from the prior year, and dividends and share repurchases, $16.1 billion, and that is up 9% from the prior year. And that's huge for investors. That's a number you definitely want to take a look at. And if you're concerned with employee count, they have it right here, 28,000, located in 80 countries and territories around the world. As for operating highlights, they have it listed for us right here, so it's easy to understand. Total volume increasing from 2021 to 2023. Payment volume increasing as well. Transactions processed on Visa's networks, again, increasing like crazy. And the number of cards going from 3.7 billion in 2021 to 4.3 billion in 2023. That's a pretty big leap, and it signifies that this company is still growing even though it has the majority market share. While we're on the topic of Visa, let's take a look at a fact sheet that they put out to their investors. This company is currently operating in more than 200 countries and territories. Cards issued worldwide, we just looked at that number, 4.3 billion. That is just a crazy number to think of when it is compared to the number of people on this earth. Total transactions, 276 billion. Again, these are numbers that are hard to wrap your head around. Number of financial institutions they work with, almost 15,000. Total volume, $15 trillion. And number of merchant locations, 130 million. So when we're talking about huge players in the payment processing game, Visa is absolutely at the top of the list. Now let's take a look at Mastercard. And believe me guys, I looked high and low for a similar report to Visa for the updated year of 2023, and I could not find it. I looked on Mastercard's website and it stopped at 2022. So the best information we have from them as far as annual reports go is this one right here, but we will take a look at Qualtrim later, which does have all the updated financials, so we'll get that either way. But starting right here at the top, we have net revenue, 22.2 billion, up 18%. The net income, 9.9 billion, up 14%. And then moving down to the non-GAAP, we have the adjusted net revenue, 22.2 billion again, up 23%. And the adjusted net income, 10.3 billion, up 32%, so a huge jump. As far as capital return to shareholders, we are looking at $10.7 billion. What does that include, you may be wondering? Well, it is right here, 8.8 billion in repurchased shares. So this company is doing a lot of share buybacks. That's great for investors. And 1.9 billion of that was paying out their dividends. Again, great for investors. I love to see that. As for cash flows, it is 11.2 billion in cash flows from operations. Again, huge numbers here. We're dealing with the top dogs in the payment processing space. As for the volume, it is 8.2 trillion, up 12%. So again, an extremely large number. And then switch transactions is 125.7 billion, up 12%. Now, if that was all gibberish to you, we will be diving into Qualtrim a little bit later, and it'll be able to give you guys a visual representation of these numbers that'll make it much easier to understand. But moving forward, we took a look at a video explaining the process of Visa and how they make money from their processing. Now let's take a look at another video explaining Mastercard and Visa as well, and how they both control the market and how Mastercard has been consistently trying to overtake Visa.
There are some things money can't buy. For everything else, there's Mastercard. With that slogan, Mastercard became one of the world's most recognizable brands. It is the second largest card network in the US, accounting for more than a quarter of all purchase volume using a payment card. Internationally, nearly a quarter of the over $624 billion spent using a payment card in 2022 was made using a Mastercard.
Mastercard is a huge company. In fact, they're the most accepted card worldwide in terms of the number of countries.
As the world transitions to a more cashless society, Mastercard's value has continued to soar. As of May 2023, the company had a market cap of over $360 billion. Shares of the company have seen nearly 100% gain over the past 5 years.
Post-financial crisis, pre-pandemic, Mastercard grew earnings at a 10-year CAGR of 20%. That's extraordinary. For context, earnings growth of the S&P overall, the market overall, is like in the high single digits.
But pressure is mounting as Mastercard faces growing competition and stricter regulations.
When you have a large enterprise as large as Mastercard, perhaps the biggest risk to their business model is regulation.
So taking a look at that clip from an investor's perspective, it's good to know that Mastercard is the preferred card when we're talking international. But let's see what else this video has to offer, because I'm telling you, there's a lot of great information in here.
The two companies account for 87% of market share based on purchase volume in the United States.
So again, when I'm talking about a lot of great data in here, this is one of the things I'm referring to. When we're comparing Visa to Mastercard, it looks like Visa's debit cards make up 31% and their credit cards make up 30% as well, coming out to 61% of the total market. Compare that to Mastercard's debit of 12% and Mastercard's credit of 14%. They are battling for the top spot. But from an investor standpoint, this could mean that there is much more growth opportunity for Mastercard.
Mastercard have the benefit of being the original ones in a market where there's tremendous first mover advantage and a tremendous incumbency effect, because once you have merchant acceptance and once you have the card issuance, like two sides of the two-sided network, it's extremely difficult to gain that scale if you're a third party coming into the market.
Internationally, Visa and Mastercard account for 63% of market shares based on global purchase volume using a payment card.
Again, more data for us as shareholders. This is the payment card market share worldwide. And as we can see, Visa makes up 39% of that, whereas Mastercard makes up 24%. So again, lagging slightly behind Visa. So we looked at Visa and how their process works. Let's take a look at how Mastercard's transactions work.
Itself. Instead, they function more like toll operators that facilitate the transfer of payments. Their network involves 4 players: the consumer, merchant, acquirer, and issuer. When a consumer swipes their card to make a purchase from a merchant, Mastercard's network communicates back and forth between the acquirer, the merchant's bank, and the issuer, the bank that issued the consumer's cards, to authorize, clear, and settle the payment.
Mastercard and Visa do not extend credit. They're not lenders. They're merely the payment processors. But that's a very lucrative business. Even just getting a small slice of those transactions, that pie continues to grow because globally there continues to be a sizable transition away from cash and towards digital payment methods.
Mastercard made over 64% of their revenue through fees generated from their intricate payment network in 2022.
So I'll pause it right there for a second. In case you missed it, 64% of Mastercard's revenue come from their fees when they're processing transactions. That's something you want to know when you're investing money into a company like this. If those fees were to be changed in the future because of regulatory reasons or for some unforeseen reason, this company would have a huge hit to their overall revenue growth and ultimately their cash flows.
The way I would think about it is that they make, on average, about 30 cents on every $100 transaction that's processed with one of their cards.
Despite their success, Mastercard has long lagged behind Visa in company performance. There are just over 3 billion Mastercard in circulation, compared to Visa's 4.1 billion. Mastercard reported a net revenue of $22.2 billion in 2022, compared to Visa's $29.3 billion in the same year. Worldwide, Mastercard accounts for nearly a quarter of market share based on purchase transactions, while Visa alone accounts for more than a third.
Now that's a lot of information to take in, but it gives us a great perspective on both of these companies and the battle that they've had since their inception. What I would like to do from here is jump into Qualtrim and compare the financials for myself. Starting with Visa, currently trading at $259 per share. As for the value section, it looks like Visa currently has a market cap of $533 billion, so $500 billion company. As far as PE, it's a 31 and forward PE at 26. So a bit on the higher side, but that's pretty common for Visa if you look at their historical average PE. It's typically in the mid to high 20s, if not low 30s. So nothing out of the norm for this company. As for the balance section, it looks like they're in debt $335 million. So really nothing for this company. They could pay that off whenever they would like. Now, this is a dividend portfolio, and I like buying dividend paying companies. So the current yield for Visa right now is 0.80. So definitely on the lower end, but that's pretty typical when you're buying into these companies that have the free cash flows and revenue to pay a lower dividend yield and still entice investors. Now, one thing I do want to point out for this company is the payout ratio is 22%. So definitely on the lower side, and that's great for investors. That means 22% of their net income is paid out in dividends. That's very healthy. And we'll compare that to Mastercard when we take a look at it. Taking a look at their revenue, it looks like in the last year, it's increased by over 11%, and in the last 10 years increased by over 10%. So they're having steady growth year after year. Nothing extraordinary, no major dips or rises, but a steady growth year after year. As for the EBITDA, it's looking a little bit lower. In the last year, it increased by 3.8%, and in the last 10 years, increased by over 10%. Taking a look at their free cash flow with stock-based compensation already included, it increased by nearly 10% in the last year, and in the last 10 years, it's averaged 23% growth. That is huge for a company, and especially a company as mature as this one. Switch this over to the free cash flow per share, and it looks like it increased by almost 10% in the last year, and in the last 10 years, over 25%. So again, huge growth. As for the net income of Visa in the last year, it is up over 15%, and in the last 10 years, up over 13%. Taking a look at that dividend, they have increased their dividend by over 15% in the last year alone, and in the last 10 years by nearly 18%. That is the reason I put this as one of my top 3 best dividend companies, and why I think it's one of the best companies in the market. Now again, I'm keeping my bias out of this, but not many people have looked into Visa's dividend because again, when they look at the yield, it's very low, which means you're going to have a substantial amount of money invested in this company in order to get some sizable dividends in return. But keep these numbers in mind because when we look at Mastercard, I want to see if they're raising their dividend as much as Visa is. One aspect I encourage everyone to look at if you're going to buy into a company, and that is shares outstanding. So for Visa, it looks like they've decreased their shares by over 2% in the last year, and in the last 10 years decreased it by over 2% as well. So this company is doing share buybacks at a healthy rate, further increasing shareholders' value. Now, when we take a look at return on capital employed, we can see that in 2023, it was 31%, so very high. The only thing for this graph that throws me off is this huge dip in 2007. Not really sure what that's about, but when you're looking at the rest of these numbers and the past 10 years, the returns on capital employed look very healthy. They are well above average. Now, as promised, let's take a look at Mastercard, which is currently trading at $419 per share. Jumping over to the value section, the market cap is $393 billion. So over $100 billion away from Visa. So that could mean that this company has more growth potential in the future. PE is 36 and the forward PE is 29, so a little bit higher than Visa as well. As for the balance section, it looks like this company is in debt $6.7 billion. Now, this isn't a huge red flag because I imagine this company could pay those debts off relatively fast, but when we're comparing it to Visa and overall investment strategy, I would prefer a company with less debt. Moving on, let's take a look at the dividend. It looks like the yield is 0.63, so lower than Visa as well. But one thing that is noteworthy is their payout ratio. It's 19.91. So lower than Visa, which is a good thing. So they're able to cover their dividend in the future, and I would imagine do some increases with no problem. Taking a look at the revenue, in the last 2 years, it's increased by over 8%. And in the last 10 years, increased by over 10%. As for the EBITDA, again, increased by over 10%, and in the last 10 years, same thing, increased by over 10%. Taking a look at free cash flow with stock-based compensation already included, and in the last 10 years, increased by over 10%. So slower growth than Visa. As for their free cash flow per share, in the last year, it is up over 6%, and in the last 10 years, it is up over 13%. As for the net income, it looks like in the last 2 years, it's increased by over 6%, and in the last 10 increased by over 12. As far as dividend goes, this company is doing some serious dividend raises. In the last year increasing it by over 15%, and in the last 10 years increasing it by over 19%. So it looks like this company is raising their dividend faster than Visa. In the last year, their share count decreased by over 1%, and in the last 10 years by over 2%. So similar to Visa, but slightly less this year. This is a good sign for shareholders. This means this company is doing share buybacks and not diluting shareholders. Lastly, let's take a look at the return on capital employed using 2022 as an example. We can see that it was nearly 50%. That is huge. And that's pretty on par with the last 5 to 10 years of this company, around that 50% mark. Now, all in all, which company do I think is a better investment right now? In my personal opinion, I would still have to lean towards Visa right now. Minus a few financial factors that we looked at here today, I still think Visa is a better investment going forward for the next 5 to 10 years. And not only that, but I've been focusing my portfolio on industry leading companies. And when we're talking about payment processors, Visa is clearly the industry leader. So for that reason, I'm going to keep buying into Visa, but I will keep a close eye on Mastercard. With that being said, this has been a pretty long video, so if you stuck around to the end, I really do appreciate that. And if you learned anything in this video and you got some value out of it, I would appreciate you subscribing and liking the video. I'll be posting much more content like this in the future. My goal is not to tell you which companies to invest your money in. Quite frankly, I do not advise you to invest your money into the companies that I pick myself. I think everybody should do their own research and make an informed decision. And that's what this video is here for, to help you make that informed decision going forward. So to close this video out, I appreciate you watching. I hope to see you in the next one. Take care.